Hello everyone! I think this lesson should be a lot of fun because we've already done all of the heavy lifting and now we just get to bring all of the pieces together. Let me show you what I mean. So in this lesson we're going to set things up so that when you like a professor, if your request is successful, we're going to update the like box in real time. So the heart will fill in and the count will be increased by 1 on the fly, and then if you click the box again, we will set up the server-side PHP to delete or remove a like. Okay, so right now, let's begin writing JavaScript to make that happen. But first, I do want you to navigate to a professor page that you have not yet liked. So if that means you need to go into your admin dashboard and delete a few like posts, that's okay. Either way, once you've navigated to a professor that you have not liked yet, we are ready to jump into our JavaScript. So over in the text editor, within our theme folder's JS modules folder, I will hop into like.js. Let's find our method that is named createLike. And within its AJAX call, let's focus on our success callback function. So maybe right above the console.log line, let's say if our request is successful, what do we want to do? First, let's fill in the outline of the heart. So let's say current LikeBox. Remember, this is the variable that we created up here that will always point towards the actual parent span element with a class of LikeBox. Okay, so again, down in our success function, I'm saying current LikeBox, and then I just want to adjust its data attribute, which is named data exists. I want to update it to have a value of yes. So let's say dot attr for attribute. Okay, and then within these parentheses, we provide two arguments. The first is the name of the attribute that you want to work with. So let's say data-exists. And the second argument is what you want to set the value to. So let's say yes. Oops, and it looks like I have a typo here. I have 3 R's instead of just 2 in the word current. Okay, so this line of code will update the hollow outline of a heart to be a solid filled in heart. Next, we want to increment the count number by 1. So let me show you how I would do that. Right below this new line that we just wrote, let's create a variable named LikeCount. You could name it whatever you want, but let's set that to equal. And first, let's use jQuery to fetch whatever the current number says. So to do that, I'll set this variable to equal current LikeBox, which is the overall parent span element. And then let's say find, and that actual count number lives within an inner span that has a class of like-count. Okay, and then to fetch that number, we just want to get the HTML for that element. This line of code could potentially get fairly long, so right now let's be sure to end the line with a semicolon. Okay, so this code at the moment will indeed fetch the HTML value of 0. However, it's going to fetch 0 as a string of text instead of an actual number or integer. So what we can do to convert this from a string of text into an actual number that we can perform mathematical operations on is this. Right before this, let's say parse int. This is a JavaScript tool that will parse a string of text as a number. Within its parentheses, we want to give it two things, so A and B. The first argument is a string of text that you want to interpret as a number, and the second argument is a number that you want to use as your base. I won't get into the details of this argument, but I will tell you that almost 9 times out of 10, we want to set this to 10 because you and I are humans, and humans tend to use a number system that is based around 10. Okay, now back to the first argument, which is the string of text you want to interpret as a number. Let's just cut and paste this code to live here. So I will select from the beginning of current all the way to the end of parentheses right after HTML. Let me cut that into my clipboard and then just replace the A placeholder. Okay, so now we've got this variable named LikeCount, which is an actual number that represents the current number of likes, But if we just successfully created a new like post, now we want to increment or add 1 to that number. So on a new line right below that, let's just say like count plus plus. In most programming languages, if you include plus plus after a number, that will increment it by 1. Okay, now finally, we want to output that new number into the HTML, right? We want to update the current number. So to do that, let's say current LikeBox, and let's look inside it and find the element that has a class of like-count. And then we want to update its HTML. And what do we want to update it to? Our like count, right? That variable that we've been creating. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. Make sure that your JavaScript is getting rebundled. And then back on the front end, be sure to perform a hard refresh. And let's test it out. So if I click the like box, awesome. Now let's change gears and work on the ability to click on the box again to toggle or remove or delete your like for the current professor. And the first step towards making that happen is for us to review our JavaScript that sends off the delete request. So back in our JavaScript, right below our createLike method is our deleteLike method. So we've got an AJAX call that's sending off a request to the same URL, but this time the type of request is a delete. But the important question here is, what exactly are we trying to delete? So we need to send along some sort of data concerning what we want to delete. So maybe right above this type line, let's add a new line and say data, colon, and then let's create a JavaScript object with curly brackets, and be sure to end the line with a comma. And this is where we can send along a property to the server. So we could make up whatever property name we want, but why don't we just say like, colon, and then this is where we will include the ID number of the like post that we want to delete. But at the moment, our JavaScript has no way of magically knowing which like post or which ID we should delete. So let's go update our HTML so that the like box contains a data attribute, maybe named data-like, and its value should be the ID number of the corresponding like post. So to edit this HTML, let's jump back into our text editor and open up single-professor.php. And let's scroll down until we find the main span with a class of LikeBox. And maybe right after class, let's just give it another data attribute. So I will say data dash, and you could name it whatever you want, but let's say like equals, and then within the quotes, let's drop into PHP and echo out our exist query, right? Because this will contain results if the current user has liked the current professor. And then let's look inside it for an array named posts. And we are interested in the first post in that array, so square brackets 0. And then we want to look inside that post for the ID. And be sure to end this with a semicolon. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. And now if I jump back to the front end and refresh, and then if I right click on the like box and inspect, cool, there's our new data attribute, data-like. If you have liked the current professor, this will contain a number that just happens to be the ID for the relevant like post. Or in other words, this is the ID number of the post that we want to delete. So with that in place, back in our JavaScript, our like.js file, within our deleteLike AJAX request, for the data, let's say like should equal current LikeBox, and then we are interested in an attribute, so .attr, and the attribute is named data-like. Okay, and before we save this, if we are going to use the current LikeBox variable within this method, we want to be sure to include it as a parameter within our function definition. So within these parentheses, I will say current LikeBox. Okay, we can go ahead and save now. However, before we test out the ability to actually delete a post, I first want to cover something else. So if you manually refresh this page, and then if I right-click on the like box and choose Inspect, obviously our server-side page template PHP is responsible for outputting the like post ID. But what if we view a professor that we have not yet liked? So just as a quick example, if I go back into my admin dashboard and delete my existing likes, just as a quick test, so move them to the trash, then I can even empty my trash. Okay, in that case, if I refresh the page, obviously, since I have not liked this professor yet, when the page first loads, that data attribute of data-like is not going to contain a value. The reason that's a problem is if I like a professor, that updates our like box on the fly in real time. However, if I wanted to toggle or remove my like right now again without refreshing the page, well, that's where the problem comes into play, because that data-like attribute is still empty. So what we need to do in order to let users toggle back and forth between liking and unliking is when we create a like post, within our success function, let's just update this data-like value on the fly. So to do that, back in our JavaScript, if we scroll up a bit, back to our create like method, within its AJAX call, let's focus on the success callback function. If a like post is successfully created, we are already filling in the heart, updating the number. So now below those lines, and maybe right above the console.log, let's add a new line, and let's just say current LikeBox. And we want to work with one of its attributes, so .attr. First argument is the name of the attribute, so it's data-like. Second argument is what you want to set its value to. And we can just say response. Because remember, if we successfully create a like post, the WordPress server sends back the ID number of that new post. That will be the response, so we can go ahead and use that here. Okay, and now, why don't we set up an equal but opposite action within our delete like method, right? If we successfully delete the relevant like, instead of changing the heart to be filled in, we would want to change the heart to be a hollow outline. And instead of increasing the number by 1, we would want to decrease the number by 1. Basically just do the opposite of all of this. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's select from the beginning of this line down to the line right above the console.log. Okay, let's copy that into our clipboard. And then if we scroll down to our delete like method, within this AJAX call, let's focus on the success callback. So if we successfully delete a post, right above this console.log, let's just add a new line and paste in our clipboard. Okay, then we just want to do the opposite of all of this, right? So we want to set data exists to no. We want to get the current like amount, but then instead of increasing it by 1, we want to decrease it by 1. So minus minus. Okay, this line is okay. We just want to update the HTML like count. And then for the data-like attribute, instead of setting it to response, in this context, let's just set it to an empty pair of quotes. Okay, and now the only thing our delete like method is missing is we need to give our AJAX call the secret nonce code so that WordPress can trust us. So let's just scroll up to our create like method, and within the AJAX call, just copy and paste the entire before send property. Then down in our delete like AJAX call, maybe right before the URL line, paste in your clipboard. Okay, and now we only have one more minor JavaScript change before we can finally set up the server-side PHP delete function. So hang in there with me. If we scroll up to the very top of this JavaScript file, within our click dispatcher method, I do need to point out that the jQuery data method only looks at the data attribute values once when the page first loads. So if we want our users to be able to toggle back and forth between liking and unliking, liking and unliking, the jQuery data method is not going to work here. So instead, let's delete that and just use the attr method. And the only difference is that instead of looking for exists, we want to look for data-exists. Okay, so that's just a quick jQuery tip. If you want to pull in fresh updated attribute values, always use the attr method. Okay, now as promised, let's go ahead and save this JavaScript file. And now the final piece of our puzzle is to set up the server-side PHP delete function. So within our theme folder's inc folder, let's jump into like-route. And if we scroll down to the very bottom, we can find our delete like function. Let's go ahead and delete this placeholder return line. And let's begin by setting up a variable. The name does not matter, but I'm going to name it like ID. And I'm going to set this to equal whatever ID the incoming JavaScript request has sent along. But first, I want to sanitize it before working with it. So sanitize text field. And what do I want to sanitize? Data, which is an array. Look inside the array for like. You just want this to match the name of the property that you're sending from your JavaScript. Okay, and if I want to be able to access the data array from within this function, I want to be sure to include it as a parameter. So say data. Okay, cool. So now we've got the ID of the post that we want to delete. So on a new line, we can just say WP delete post. Then these parentheses, we give it two arguments. The first argument is obviously the ID of the post that you want to delete. And the second argument is if you want to send it to the trash first, or if you just want to skip the trash and completely delete it. If you say true, you are skipping the trash step. Now, I need to point out that this is the most insecure code perhaps ever written in the history of WordPress. So before we save this, we definitely need to wrap this line of code within an if statement. Because we are creating a custom API endpoint, which means the REST API is not going to babysit permissions for us. We need to set up our own basic permission check. Let me show you what I mean. So go ahead and cut this line into your clipboard so that we have it ready, but we are temporarily removing it. And let's write an if statement. So if parentheses curly brackets, and for the condition check, let's say only if get current user ID equals, and then let's say the author ID of the post that they are trying to delete. So that way a malicious user can't just go around deleting whatever post they feel like. Instead, they can only delete something if they're the one who created it. So if the current user ID matches, and then let's say get post field, and you give this two arguments. The second argument is the ID of the post that you want information about. So let's say like ID, right, that variable we created. And the first argument is what information you want about that post. So let's just say post author. And we could even be a bit more restrictive with the if statement. And in between these two closing parentheses, we could say, and let's make sure that get post type of whatever ID they're trying to delete, let's make sure that that equals like. Okay, so if both of those things are true, then within the if statement, we can paste in our clipboard. And then right after the if closing curly brackets, let's say else, otherwise, let's cancel the current request, so die, and return a message of you do not have permission to delete that. And just as a best practice, why don't we make sure to return something within the success area? So after we delete the post, right below that line, we can say return congrats like deleted. Be sure to end the line with a semicolon, and let's save this and test it out. So perform a hard refresh on the front end. I've already liked Dr. Frogerson, so if I click on the box, cool, it deletes my like. But I could click it again to add the like back. And now if I open this same page in another window where I'm logged in with my subscriber account, we see a count of 1 because the admin account liked it. And if I click on it with my subscriber account, that boosts it up to 2. Or I could click it again to toggle it back down to 1. Beautiful. And that's going to bring this lesson and this section to a close. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next section.